Hello everybody and welcome to the Gaming Grappler. A few weeks ago, the remake for Resident Evil 4 came out, and I have been tearing my way through that video game. I can't wait to review it, but I noticed that while I was crafting my review, I was spending an ungodly amount of time just talking about how well the Regenerators were handled in the remake. And it got to the point that I derailed a significant portion of that review just talking about how well the Regenerators were handled in a survival horror context. So it makes sense to me that at this point, I should just dedicate an entire video to why the Regenerators are peak survival horror. But before I continue, what even is horror in a video game context? What even is horror? Well, horror, in short, is a fear of the unknown. What we don't know builds anxiety. And anxiety can be best understood as when your brain thinks up negative outcomes. When those negative outcomes become real in your head, that's fear. Our brains can sabotage ourselves in a way that professional directors could never even compete with. But you might be thinking, why would I pay $100 to experience fear and anxiety? Two negative emotions that just sucks. Well, the reason why you would want to do that is that fighting fears can be gripping and engaging. It's been well documented that a lot of UFC fighters are terrified about stepping in the octagon. As a matter of fact, people like George St. Pierre, one of the best mixed martial artists of all time, is on record saying he's scared of cage fighting. But one of the reasons why these people do it is it's worth it. It's worth it because when you conquer your fears, when you come out on top, you become stronger and better as a person. And video games can let you get a taste of that. Regenerators are unique. They build fear through the game's cinematography, the visual design of the monster, the game's combat system, and all three of these aspects are perfectly executed in a way that makes Regenerators one of gaming's most iconic horror icons. But before I break it down, I gotta get the self-promotion out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more this channel grows, the more time, effort, and dedication I can bring into delivering you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. And I just want to thank you guys. My channel has been growing exponentially in the last 3 months, and that's because of you guys, the fans. With that being said, let's get this video on the road. The way the cinematography showcases the Regenerators in Resident Evil 4 is just pure genius, because a lot of other enemies in the game are first shown to the player through some type of in-game cutscene or cinematic, but the Regenerators are experienced entirely through the gameplay, which is a lot more powerful. As a matter of fact, a lack of cutscenes can still be cinematic. Resident Evil 4 builds its fear and anxiety around the Regenerators exclusively through the gameplay. And what I don't like about cutscenes is that they can try to force a perspective of fear on the player that doesn't really stick. Like, imagine if the first time you heard about Regenerators was through a cutscene where you saw an NPC you'd never seen before say something like, "By God, I saw those things. They killed Curtis like it was nothing. Game over, man. Game over." This to me would look schlocky and B-movie-ish, and it would innately put some distance between the player and what they're experiencing. The less control you have of your character, the less personal the experience will feel to you. And before I continue, I just want to briefly go over what even is cinematography. Cinematography is the art and technology of motion picture technology through composition, lighting, set location, and the use of special effects. Now, we don't really have a good word for this in gaming, but cinematography will have to do here. And we're also pretty limited on the camera angles and shot composition, because through the gameplay, the only real camera angle we have is the over-the-shoulder camera perspective. But with that being said, the lighting, the set design, which in a video game context would be the levels, and the location were all expertly designed and meticulously put into place by a director. The setting where you first experience the Regenerators is perfection. You find these guys on a secluded island in a sketchy laboratory. You are deep into enemy territory with your back up against the wall, facing the unknown. That is the perfect horror movie premise right there. You could even argue that a laboratory setting is innately uncomfortable for a lot of people. Like, for argument's sake, let's just say that a player's only experience in the operating room is getting their cavity filled at the dentist. That still associates this new environment with negative past experiences. It should also be noted that at this point in time, the player's vision is just severely compromised. You're down to your flashlight, which only exposes a small radius at a time. It's at this moment that the player will catch a small glimpse of a regenerator, but they don't have enough information to be properly scared of them. They might even hear their horrific breathing in the background, but this is still mysterious. The player will then walk into various operating rooms where they'll see the remnants of horrific experiments and documents detailing what a regenerator is. The player will build up anxiety. They will fill in the gaps as to everything they're reading. Was that monster I just saw a regenerator? Why are they doing all this? All the reasons that the player comes up with their head are a lot better than whatever cutscene or cinematic could have possibly described to them. It really doesn't matter how campy or schlocky this setup is. The fact that the player is discovering this through gameplay feels more real. Like, if you actually came across an abandoned laboratory and all the horrific experiments that were in it, you would be legit scared. And gameplay is the closest thing that the player has to that type of feeling and sensation. It should be noted at this time, when the player has fully explored the laboratory, that they'll encounter their regenerator for the first time. And I gotta say, it is hilariously understated. Like, this guy just shows up with no cutscene or formal introduction to attack you and maul the hell out of you. And it feels more real. Like, if the player was attacked by a mountain lion or some bear while they were hiking, there would be no introduction or cutscene. You would just be fighting for your life out of nowhere. And it's that feeling of dread that the game is able to tap into exclusively through its gameplay. There are a lot of factors to take into account when we discuss what makes an iconic movie or video game monster work or come to life. Like, it's not enough for the artist to just put an iconic design on a piece of paper. There's a lot of subtle design choices that make that monster work. Like, its silhouette, the kind of thing that the player will be seeing under low visibility conditions. But another thing to take into account is that one of the reasons why the Regenerators from Resident Evil 4 are so scary is that these monsters perfectly encapsulate the Uncanny Valley. Well, what even is the Uncanny Valley? The Uncanny Valley is when a creature, monster, or robot design looks realistically human, but just falls short of hitting the mark. It makes people feel innately uncomfortable to look at. A popular and mainstream example of the Uncanny Valley would be the Roswell Gray aliens. And one of the reasons why so many people find these little guys so disturbing is that if you just saw them from the peripheral of your vision, you might mistake them from a person. But on closer inspection, all their proportions are all just slightly out of whack and kind of creepy to look at. And let's just say you're not scared by the Uncanny Valley. It's probably highly likely that it at least makes you uncomfortable, because it's quantifiable at this point that the Uncanny Valley is highly disturbing to mainstream movie-going audiences. Like, for example, in the first trailer for the Sonic the Hedgehog movie showcasing his movie design, it was highly rejected by the masses. Sonic had realistically looking human teeth, and his body looked like a muscular little man that was painted blue. It was highly disturbing to look at and was off-putting for most audiences, to the point that for the first time, a big-time movie studio had to redo the entire CGI for a movie. I mean, that's just ouch right there. And what about Cats? It suffered from the same sort of problem, where all the characters, instead of being cartoon cat people, were realistic, naked-looking human people. And it was just gross to look at, and the movie bombed as a result of this. While the Uncanny Valley might not be suitable for a children's mascot character, it is absolutely perfect for your very own horror movie or video game monster, where the entire premise is to scare the player and make them feel uncomfortable. In that regard, the Regenerator fits that description to a T. At first glance, if you saw a Regenerator in the peripheral of your vision, you might mistaken them for a person or a weaker enemy variant in the game. But on closer inspection, you'll notice that they're tall and lanky. All of their limbs are just slightly long enough to be out of proportion and unrealistic, which is unnerving. It also helps that the way they move is completely alien in this game. Like their walk cycle looks like it was generated by an AI to be as uncomfortable as possible. And rather than stepping over obstacles, they'll just flop over them. And the reason why they do this is in the name. They're regenerators. They are semi-immortal creatures who don't care about taking fall damage. There's no way to relate to these creatures in the slightest. Like if you blast off their legs, instead of trying to run for safety or recover or stand up, they'll just slither on the ground because they don't care about anything. They're like a virus, just dead set on killing you by any means possible. It's in the name. They're regenerators. Everything you do to them, they'll just come back. You blow off their legs or their head, it'll just grow back and they'll come back stronger, which makes them a problem from a gameplay standpoint. It also helps that the way they breathe is unnerving. They breathe out of sync and at a weird pattern that no human being or no animal actually does on the planet. And that alien feeling can make them scary even when you don't see them. So in that regard, the visual design for the Regenerators is completely on point in this game. We already talked about how the cinematography primes the player to be afraid of encountering a regenerator. We also talked about how the visual design of these iconic monsters is inherently disturbing and off-putting to most people out there. But what we haven't discussed is how all of this plays out in a combat scenario. What is it about actually fighting a regenerator in gameplay that players dread so much? And that simple thing is all in the name. These monsters are semi-immortal, and that semi-immortality poses a lot of problems in a game where ammo scarcity is a huge problem, because while a lot of players won't find these monsters scary, they might be scared of losing resources while they fight them, because typical gaming tropes don't work on them. Headshots at most will just slow them down, and taking out their legs can actually make things harder, especially if you're trying to hit their weak spot while they're sneaking around the floor at sonic speed. The only reliable way to deal with regenerators is by using the heat scope, and the heat scope is exactly what it sounds like. It's heat vision for rifle-based weaponry. And what I love about that setup is that most regenerator encounters are in tight enclosed spaces, so the player will be forced in a situation where they have to use a sniper rifle for close quarters combat. It's like the perfect scenario for building tension in your gameplay. Using the heat scope will kill most of your visibility, and a lot of rifles in this game have terrible recoil, so the player will be running around frantically trying to line up shots. I was once in a situation where I ran out of my sniper rifle ammo and I had to just memorize where all the weak points were while I switched to other weapons. That is just peak survival horror gameplay. All right, for the execution section, I'm just going to be covering how well all the regenerator encounters were handled in the remake. I'm going to be skipping the first encounter since I pretty much covered that in the cinematography section, but the second encounter is also pretty iconic. The player is in a freezer area, which is already a pretty uncomfortable atmosphere, and the thing just spawns out of nowhere while the player is forced to wait for a keycard to update, and that is just classic survival horror. The third encounter is completely unique to the remake, where the player will come across a laboratory that has 4 regenerators in suspended animation. And what I love about this setup is that they don't even have to blatantly attack the player, because at this point in the game, especially if this is your first time playing Resident Evil 4, you most likely have struggled to deal with just one of these guys in a one-on-one encounter. The prospect of fighting 4 of them builds tension, and I just love how simple it is to build fear in the gameplay. The regenerator encounters that happen while you have to defend Ashley are also pretty simple, yet genius, for the simple reason that a lot of players might not even feel fear while they fight these things, for the simple reason that Leon is honestly too much of a badass in this game. This guy can just roundhouse kick demons in the face, so for me, it was a little difficult to feel fear in the gameplay, but not so much when I had to defend Ashley, because Ashley is a defenseless civilian. So in that situation, fear and tension was built, not because I was scared for my own life, but because I had to protect someone else's. So again, it's another simple and elegant way to build tension in the gameplay. I think my favorite Regenerator encounter in this game is the one where Leon and Ashley get temporarily separated by a drawbridge, and it's at this moment that she begins to get mobbed by Ganados, and at this point, the player is also mobbed, but by a single Regenerator, so the player has to prioritize sniping the Ganados while also fighting off a Regenerator. It's just a brilliant way to build tension in the gameplay. And there's also an amazing part where once the player defeats the Ganados and runs across the bridge, Ashley has a chance to shine, and she actually drops the Regenerator down the bridge. And it's just a brilliant and iconic moment that happened in the remake. With that being said, I'm going to have to call this a video. I just spent over 15 minutes just talking about a single enemy type from Resident Evil 4. We are way over the expiration date, especially since this wasn't even supposed to be a video, but here we are.